I came to get my 5-year-old daughter from my ex-wife's house, but all the lights were off and her shoes were sitting outside in the rain. Then a neighbor whispered, "You should call the police." But before I begin, I want to make an important announcement about our channel. For the past 5 months, our channel has not been monetized, which means I'm not earning any money from YouTube ads. There are currently no ads running on our videos. Because of this, I also have to work another job, which makes it difficult for me to upload videos daily. If you enjoy our content and want to support the channel, please consider donating just $1. $1 may seem small, but if everyone supports together, it can make a huge difference and help keep this channel active. Your support will help me spend more time creating stories and uploading videos consistently instead of working another job. Of course, you can donate any amount you would like, and every donation truly helps and means a lot to me. To support the channel, please click the donation link in the video description or pinned comment. You can also scan the QR code shown on the screen to donate quickly and easily. Thank you so much for supporting. Now, let's dive into today's story. The rain started before sunset and kept getting worse. By the time Nolan Pierce crossed the county line in a mill field, the highway had turned into something dark and uncertain beneath his tires. The wipers worked hard and still barely kept up. Water ran fast along both shoulders of the road, foam collecting at the low spots, the ditches already full. Above the tree lines, the sky was the color of old iron. No gap in it anywhere. No hint that Ike intended to change. He had driven in worse. He had driven through Ohio winters that shut down the highways and made every other driver pull over. And he had kept going because he had somewhere to be. Weather was a condition, not a decision. You adjusted for it and you kept moving. What he could not adjust for was the clock on the dashboard reading 6:47. He should have been parked on Maple Street at 6:30 on the dot. That was the arrangement, not just the custody agreement, which said 6:30 in black ink on the relevant page, but the arrangement had with himself and with Ava. Every Friday, without exception for 11 months, he pulled up to the curb outside number 14. Engine off, and within about 30 seconds the front curtain moved and a small face appeared at the glass. Nose pressed to the window. Watching. Waiting. The same face every time, patient and certain, because Ava had learned that certain things in her world were reliable, and Nolan arriving on Friday was one of them. That the fuel line job at the yard had run 17 minutes long. He had called 3 times on the drive and gotten voicemail each time, which was not unusual for Betrayal. She let his calls go the way she let most things she did not want to deal with go, and texted back something vague when it suited her. He told himself it was fine. 17 minutes was nothing. She would still be at the window. He turned onto Maple Street and pressed the gas a little harder. The block was quiet the way blocks get in heavy rain. Everyone pulled inward, the street to itself, just the sound of tires through standing water and the steady rhythm on the roof of his truck. Heck knew this block by feel. Every driveway, every porch light, every car that was usually parked out front. He had driven it twice a week for almost a year. He could have navigated it in the dark. He slowed as number 14 came into view. The house was dark, not dim, dark. No porch light. No faint blue flicker from the television through the curtains. No small silhouette standing at the front window. The house had the particular quality of a place that nobody has been in for several hours. Something in the absence of sound and light that is different from just quiet. Nolan felt it before he could have explained it. He pulled to the curb and sat with the engine running. The wipers kept going. He looked at the house, and he told himself the ordinary explanations. Betrayal took Ava out for dinner and lost track of time. The power went out in this part of the block. Something normal had happened that would explain itself in a minute. He told himself these things while the certainty behind them drained away. Then he saw the sneakers. They were sitting on the front step, just left of the door. Small white sneakers with pink Velcro straps. Ava's sneakers, the ones she wore everywhere. She had loved those shoes since April, had worn them to the park and the grocery store, and to her friend Lily's birthday party, and to the library bench on Tuesday evenings where Nolan read to her. She had worn them to bed once during a bad thunderstorm because she told him, with complete seriousness, that wearing them made her feel ready for whatever happened. She trusted those shoes the way she trusted things that had never let her down, They were sitting in a puddle of standing water on the front step, soaked through. Just sitting there like someone had set them down and walked away. Nolan turned off the engine and got out into the rain. He crossed the lawn in 4 long strides. Up the porch steps. He knocked hard. 3 solid knocks with the side of his fist, the kind that went through a door rather than stopping at it. Brielle. Nothing. No footsteps inside. No voice from somewhere in the back of the house. The rain kept falling, and the house kept being silent, but he knocked again. Harder. Brielle, open the door. The screen door at the house next door pushed open, and Hank Dobbs stepped halfway out, one hand in the doorframe. He was in his mid-60s, white stubble across his jaw, a retired mechanic who had lived on this block for 3 decades and kept mostly to himself. He watched the neighborhood the way mechanics watch engines, not intrusively, just with attention. He noticed things. Tanaid looked uneasy in a way that went beyond ordinary concern. There was a man here earlier, he said quietly. His voice was low enough that Nolan stepped off the porch and into the rain to hear him. The one your ex-wife's been seeing lately. Dark truck, tattoos up his neck. I saw him carrying the little girl inside around 4 this afternoon. Nolan's chest tightened hard. Carrying her, she wasn't walking on her own. He had her up over his shoulder. Went inside, stayed maybe an hour. Then your wife came out around 5, got in her car and left. Hank paused. The truck backed out maybe 15 minutes after. I haven't seen any lights come on in that house since. How long ago? Close to 3 hours now. Nolan turned back to the front door. He tried the handle, locked, and took 1 step back and drove his shoulder into the door above the lock plate. The frame cracked. The door swung hard into a dark interior and hit the wall behind it. The smell inside reached him before his eyes adjusted. Stale wine and cigarette smoke, and underneath both something sweet and wrong that he could not name. An empty bottle lay on its side near the couch. The dark stain dried into the carpet beneath it. The television was still on, turned low, a children's cartoon playing to an empty room. Ava's star blanket, the soft fleece one with the yellow star she had carried everywhere since she was 2, was crumpled on the floor between the couch and the coffee table, one corner damp. Nolan moved through the house in under a minute. Kitchen. A bowl of cereal still on the counter, the milk gone warm. Empty. Bathroom. Ava's small toothbrush on the edge of the sink, her step stool pushed against the cabinet below. Empty. The back bedroom. Then Ava's room. The small one at the end of the hall with the butterfly stickers on the door that she had pressed on with great care one Sunday afternoon in August, choosing each sticker's position as if placement mattered, which for Ava it always did. Her stuffed rabbit on the pillow. Her crayons in a cup on the windowsill. A drawing half-finished on the small desk near the window. A yellow house, a round sun above it. 3 figures in orange and purple crayon the way a 5-year-old draws figures, the largest one holding the smallest one's hand. Empty. Nolan stood in the doorway and did not move for a moment. He looked at the rabbit on the pillow. He looked at the drawing on the desk. He looked at the 3 figures in orange and purple crayon. 3 figures, when he and Ava were only 2. He breathed in once through his nose and felt the full cold weight of what was not in this room press against him. Then he turned around, walked back through the house, and called 911 from the front porch. The divorce had been final for 11 months. Nolan had moved through it the way he moved through most things that were difficult and permanent, steadily, without drama, without the indulgence of extended grief over what could not be changed. He had found an apartment. He had kept his job at the diesel yard. He had organized his schedule around the custody agreement and shown up to every single scheduled hour because the hours he was given were the hours he was given, and every one of them counted. He and Brielle had been together for 7 years, married for 4 of them. Ava came in the 3rd year, and for a while, a real while, not a brief one, things were good. Solidly, quietly good, the way good things usually are. He worked long shifts at the yard outside Columbus, and came home dirty and tired most nights, but he came home. He made sure the bills were paid, and the heat stayed in, and the refrigerator had what it needed. He was there for Ava's first steps, and her first real words, and every bad dream she had between ages 2 and 4. He did not consider any of this exceptional. He considered it the job that came with being a husband and a father, and he did the job. Brielle grew restless, and it happened gradually enough that he nearly missed it happening. She went out more. Weekend trips with friends, late evenings that ran longer than originally described. He did not monitor her. He was not that kind of man. He told himself she had every right to a life outside their small house and her short hours at the dental office, and he gave her the space she seemed to need without examining too carefully what she was doing in it. He found out about Cade Rayner from a text on her phone that she left face up on the kitchen table. He was not looking for it. He was just passing through, bringing a cup back from the living room, and the message was right there. He stood very still for a moment, looking at it. Then he put the cube in the sink and went and sat on the floor next to Ava in the living room, where she was building something out of blocks, and he watched her for a while without saying anything. Cade Rayner was the kind of man who photographed well and fell apart under any real inspection. That he was loud in a way that filled rooms without contributing to them. He talked about deals and connections in a way that sounded specific enough to seem real, but never produced anything verifiable. He wore clothes that looked expensive and drove a truck he could not have paid for honestly, and he had a kind of practiced confidence that worked on people who mistook the performance for the substance. Nolan had shaken his hand exactly once and known within 30 seconds what kind of person he was dealing with. The kind whose grip is too firm, because hell-earned firmness conveys strength without learning that strength does not come from a grip. He had told Betrayal once, directly and without raising his voice. There's something wrong with that man. I cannot prove what it is. I'm not asking you to act on it right now, but I'm telling you what I see, and I need you to be careful with our daughter around him. Betrayal had looked at him with the expression she reserved for conversations she had already decided the outcome of. You're jealous, she said. Matter of fact, not unkind. The way you close a topic rather than end an argument, he let it go. Because what do? You note it. You say your piece. You trust that the person knows you well enough to carry your concern in the back of their mind, even if they will not act on it directly. What he had not anticipated was AV to her 5th birthday party. 6 weeks before the divorce was finalized, Kate had shown up uninvited with a gas station bag and that practiced smile. He stood near the food table being too loud for a room full of 5-year-olds and parents who did not know what to make of him. The children gave him the unconscious wide berth that small children give to adults who make them uneasy. Ava had pressed herself against Nolan's leg and looked up at him with eyes that were working harder than eyes at a birthday party should have to work. Daddy, she said very quietly, Mommy's friend scares me. Nolan had crouched down and held her and told her she was safe. He had believed at that moment that he could handle it through the right channels. The custody agreement, documented concerns, Betrayal eventually seeing the obvious. He had been wrong about how much time he had. Now his daughter's rabbit sat on the pillow of an empty bedroom, and her shoes were soaking on the front step in the rain, and the man who scared her had carried her out of this house, and nobody had reported it for 3 hours. The Millfield Police Department was in a beige one-story building on the corner of 3rd and Grant with old fluorescent lighting and a pervasive smell of stale coffee and printer toner. The woman at front desk handed Nolan a clipboard. He set it on the counter without picking up the pen. I need to speak with someone immediately, he said. My 5-year-old daughter has been taken. Officer Raylan Boone came out from a back room in under 5 minutes. He was thin, late 30s, with steady gray eyes and the deliberate pace of someone trained to de-escalate by slowing things down. He led Nolan to a desk, sat across from him, and asked him to start from the beginning. Nolan laid it out completely. The pickup time in the dark house. The neighbor's account, Hank Dobbs, 30 years on the block, who had watched Cade carry Ava inside around 4 in the afternoon, and then watched Betrayal leave in her car, and the dark truck leave 20 minutes after that. The empty rooms. The overturned bottle, the blanket on the floor, and the shoes soaking in the rain. Cade Rayner's name and description and truck, and the fact that he had no legal standing under any custody agreement in existence to have Ava in his care. Boone listened without interrupting. His pen moved steadily across the notepad. When Nolan finished, Boone looked up. You think the boyfriend took her? I know he did. Any proof beyond what the neighbor told you? My daughter has been at that window every Friday for 11 months without exception. Tonight the window is dark. The house is empty, and the last person seen with her drove away with her 3 hours ago. That's what I have, along with a neighbor willing to testify to what he witnessed. Boone kept writing. Have you been able to reach your ex-wife? 12 times. No answer. We'll issue an alert and begin attempting to locate both your ex-wife and Mr. Rayner. That gets the official process moving. Nolan looked at him steadily. How many people are actively driving toward wherever my daughter is right now? Boone set his pen down. I understand the urgency, Mr. Pierce, but we have to follow a process that makes the case hold. My daughter is 5 years old, Nolan said. Quietly. Precisely. She has been missing for close to 3 hours. The man who may have her told her mother he owed money to dangerous people. Mid-Otter told me directly that this man scared her. I passed that information to her mother and was told I was jealous. Now, she is somewhere she has never been before, and it is getting dark, and she does not have her shoes. He paused. I'm not asking about your process. I am asking how many people are moving toward her right now. Boone had a careful answer about multi-agency alerts and coordination and how these things worked. Nola heard most of it. He stood up when the part arrived about staying available and letting law enforcement handle things. I'll find her myself, he said. I'll call you when I do. The door swung closed behind him. He sat in his truck in the parking lot for about 40 seconds. He looked at the rain on the windshield. He thought about the rabbit on the pillow in the empty room. He thought about the drawing on the desk, the 3 figures in orange and purple crayon, the largest one holding the smallest one shand. He thought about what it meant that there were 3 figures when there were only 2 off them. He picked up his phone and started dialing. He found her because he knew her. After 7 years together, he understood how Betrayal moved through distress, and the pattern was consistent. She went toward noise. She could not sit alone with something heavy pressing on her. She needed a crowd and something in her hand and the low-level comfort of strangers doing ordinary things nearby. The sense that the world was still going, even when her part of it was not. She had always been this way. He had watched it happen enough times during the marriage to know the shape of it, and he had long ago stopped attaching judgment to it. It was simply how she was built. Tonight, that pattern was the only useful thing she had left to offer him, that he drove the back roads between Millfield and Lancaster with the kind of focus that comes from having no margin for error. 2 bars before the right one. Small lots, few cars, nothing matching. The third place was a roadside bar called Lakeview Tap that sat on the bend of a county road with a gravel lot and a neon sign, missing a letter. Brielle's blue Honda was at the far end of the lot, parked at the right rear tire kissing the drainage ditch, the slightly crooked way she always parked when she was in a hurry or had already been drinking. Nolan pulled in. He sat in the truck for a moment and let himself be still. The anger had been building since the moment he saw the dark house on Maple Street, growing through every unanswered call and every empty room and every mile of county road. He was aware of it precisely, could feel its shape and temperature, sitting in his chest and spreading down through his hands. It was not uncontrolled. It was not going anywhere, but it was real and it was large, and he needed to keep it pointed in the right direction. He got out and walked into the bar. The inside was warm and smelled like fried food and old wood and beer that had missed a glass. Music overhead. Voices from the counter. The click of pool balls from somewhere past the narrow hallway on the left. 20 people, maybe slightly more. He scanned once, unhurried, and found Brielle at a table near the back. 3 empty glasses on the table. Mascara tracked down one cheek. Her head tipped back, laughing at something the man beside her had just said. Nolan walked straight toward her. She saw him when he was about 10 feet away. The laugh died instantly. Her face went through 3 things in under 2 seconds. Recognition, then something that was not quite surprise, but was in its direction, then a braced and settled dread. It was not the look of someone who does not know what is coming. It was the look of someone who has been waiting for it. Where is Ava? The people at the table beside hers went quiet. Brielle's hands moved to the edge of the table. Nolan, where is our daughter? I don't know exactly where he went. Her voice was careful in the way of someone who has rehearsed a partial version of what they are going to say. I left her with him for a little while, and when I came back they were gone. Nolan pulled out the chair beside her and sat her down. Tell me everything, he said, from the beginning. Leave nothing out. She looked at her hands on the table. She moved one of the empty glasses an inch, and then moved it back. A small, useless gesture. "We had a fight," she said. "A bad one. He's been under real pressure for weeks. Money pressure, the kind that comes with people who don't wait patiently. He's been scared and getting worse. Today was different. Today he was talking about moving fast and needing cash in a way that didn't make sense, and we screamed at each other, and Ava was right there in the house." She paused. "So I left. I needed to get out. I thought, an hour, things calm down, I come back and it's fine." Nolan looked at her. He said nothing for a long moment. "You left our 5-year-old daughter alone in a house with a man who was scared, irrational, and being chased by dangerous people who want money from him." It was not a question. Brielle heard the weight of it, and her chin dropped. "I know," she said, barely audible. "She told me he scared her," Nolan said. "I told you that. I told you directly what she said. You told me I was jealous." Brielle said nothing. "When did you go back to the house?" 2 hours later. Maybe a little more. She closed her eyes briefly. "I know it was too long. I know what that sounds like." Real tears arrived now. Not the managed kind she deployed when the situation called for softening, but the involuntary kind that comes when a person has been running from what they have done and finally stops running. Her shoulders came forward. Her breath caught in an uneven rhythm. "He said people were looking for him," she said. "He said if he had money, he could fix everything and it would all be over. I didn't think he would actually take her. I didn't think he would use her as leverage. I didn't think—" "You knew he was dangerous," Nolan said. "You knew the situation he was in. You left her there anyway." He stood up and put his phone on the table between them, voice memo running. "You're going to tell me every location he ever mentioned, every name, every contact, every place he talked about when things got bad. Every conversation you can remember where he talked about people he owed or places he could go to disappear. Everything." He looked at her steadily, and she looked back at him. "Then you go to Grant Street. Officer Boone, you tell him everything you tell me, including how long you waited before calling anyone, including what you knew about the debt and who he outed to. Every word. If I find out you held anything back, I will make sure the prosecutor understands your role in this in exact detail." Brielle looked at the phone, then at his face. Whatever remained of the managed, careful version of herself she had been maintaining collapsed, and what came out of it was just a frightened woman who had finally stopped calculating how this looked and started understanding what she had done. She started talking that IT took 10 minutes. Her voice broke once, and she corrected herself on a name. But the information came out, a location near Lancaster that Cade had mentioned during a bad stretch, something about old railroad land where people didn't look, a contact who did off-book work, a car debt that had turned into something much worse than a car debt. Nolan took it all without expression, the recorder running the whole time. When she was done, he picked up the phone. "Grant Street. Boone. Now, not in an hour." He walked toward the door without looking back. They were in the parking lot. Brielle still near the bar entrance. Nolan halfway across the gravel toward his truck when the phone buzzed in his hand. Unknown number. He answered on the first ring and said nothing. 2 seconds of silence from the other end. Then a voice he had heard only a few times before, but recognized immediately. Easy, unhurried, carrying the particular looseness of someone who believes the situation is entirely in his favor. "Cade, I know you've been driving around," he said. "You might as well stop and listen." Nolan turned away from the bar, toward the dark tree line at the far edge of the lot. He stood still. $50,000, Cade said. "Cash. By Sunday morning. You bring it where I tell you and your daughter comes home safe. You bring police or anyone from the government into this, and the situation gets a lot more complicated for everyone involved. Where is she? She's fine. She's sleeping. Put her on the phone. That's not how this works. Put my daughter on the phone right now, or I call every federal agency that exists in the next 30 seconds. A pause. Then movement on the other end. The soft sound of someone crossing a floor that creaked. A door opening into a different space. And then, thin and slightly muffled through the connection, but completely unmistakable to the ears of a father who had listened to it every night for 5 years. The small, half-asleep sounds of a child being disturbed from sleep. A cough. A confused, barely formed murmur. The sound of someone very small and very tired and not where she was supposed to be. Ava. Nolan's hand closed on the phone until the case edges cut into his palm. He kept his face still. He kept his breathing even. He heard, behind him, Brielle make a short, sharp sound. She had heard it. Cade came back on a moment later, and now the satisfaction was fully present in his voice. The pleasure of a man confirming that what he is holding has the value he thought it had. Happy? She's fine. 50 grand, Sunday morning. I'll text the location tomorrow night. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. If you touch her, Nolan said, and his voice was completely flat, carrying nothing except the words themselves, stated with the certainty of someone describing a physical law. You will not walk again. A short laugh. Dismissive. The laugh of a man who has made an assessment and found the threat manageable. You don't scare me, man. I'm not trying to scare you, Nolan said. I'm telling you what is going to happen. There is a difference. Silence. Then the call ended. Nolan lowered the phone. The rain had lightened to a mist. He stood still in the gravel parking lot and felt the full shape of the situation settle around him. Ava in some dark place he did not yet know. Cade on the other end of a call that had just confirmed everything. The clock moving, he turned and walked back past Brielle without looking at her. Grant Street, he said. Boone. Right now. He got his truck. The first call was to Dustin Hale, and it lasted less than a minute. Nolan said, Ava's gone. I need you and everyone you can reach my place now. Dustin said on the way. That was the entire conversation. Nolan heard a truck engine start before he hung up. He made 7 more calls on the drive back. He kept each one direct and short. He did not ask. He told each person what had happened and where to be, and every single response was some version of. On my way to be by the time Nolan pulled into his own driveway, the first trucks were already there. By the time he opened the garage, the driveway and part of the lawn were full. 8 vehicles in total. Crew cabs and work trucks with toolboxes in the beds and the comfortable wear of machines used for actual work. These are not dangerous men by nature. They were mechanics and roofers and factory workers and 2 who did odd jobs and not much else, but who had stood next to Nolan when it counted before. They were not organized or resourced in any impressive way. What they had was the straightforward understanding that a child they knew and cared about was gone, and the man who was going to go find her was standing in a garage under a single overhead bulb, and they were going to be in that garage when he left. Nobody smiled when they stepped out of their trucks. Nobody made the kind of nervous joke men sometimes make to cut the weight in a room. They came in, and they stood, and they waited. Dustin came in first. 2 baseball bats leaned over one shoulder, set against the workbench without ceremony. He looked at Nolan and said nothing. He did not need to. Wes Pruitt came in behind him, a wide, slow-moving man with the particular calm of someone who has not panicked in a long time because he has found it unproductive. He carried a tire iron in each hand and set them on the floor. Trevor Marsh came last, and Nolan watched him stop at his truck cab, one hand resting on the gun rack inside the door. The pause lasted about 2 seconds. Then Trevor closed the door and left the shotgun where it was and came inside. Good judgment. Right call. Nolan would have said so, but there was no time that he stood in the middle of the garage with rain hammering the metal roof. He took my daughter tonight, he said. Simple, flat, no preamble. She's alive. He called me. He wants money by Sunday. I'm not waiting until Sunday. The garage was completely silent. I need a location. This man is running from a debt. He needs somewhere cheap and remote where he can disappear and move fast if he has to. If anyone in this room has any connection to Cade Rayner, any person, any location, any detail at all, I need it right now. A man named Porter, heavy set, standing near the back wall, cleared his throat. There's a guy who ran with him a while back. Ray Stills. Does off-book work outside Lancaster. Keeps his head down. He might have something. Get him on the phone. Porter looked at his watch, looked at Nolan, then stepped to the far corner of the garage and dialed. Nobody moved. Someone shifted weight. Someone cracked their knuckles. The rain on the metal roof was very loud. Porter came back in 4 minutes. Abandoned trailer outside Chillicothe. Old railroad, right of way back in the trees. Ray says Cade used it a couple of winters ago when he was hiding from a guy over a car debt. Said it once is a place nobody goes looking. Dustin had already pulled up the area on his phone. He pinched and zoomed, found the gravel track that matched, held it up. "That's it," Nolan said. He looked around the garage at all of them. "We go now." They went to their trucks without discussion. Nolan drove in front with Dustin in the passenger seat, reading directions in a flat, steady voice. The convoy moved at a pace nobody argued with on rain-slicked Ohio highway. The drive was 40 minutes. Nolan said almost nothing. Dustin, who knew the particular quality off this silence, said nothing either. The highway lights came and went outside the windows, then gave way to county road, dark, flat, and close on all sides. Nolan thought about Ava on that drive. He thought about her deliberately, the way you think about something you're going to collect, carefully with attention, not allowing any other thought to take up the space. He thought about how she pronounced certain words slightly wrong and showed no interest in being corrected. He thought about how she called for him at night when she was afraid. Not a scream, but a patient, steady repetition of his name, because she had learned that she could call for him and he would come. He thought about the courthouse parking lot on the day the divorce was finalized, how she'd taken his hand without being asked, 5 years old and understanding something without being told. He thought, "I'm coming." He thought, "I'm almost there." The gravel track appeared in the headlights, and he killed the lights and kept going. The track was narrow and rough, pressed between trees whose branches scraped the sides of the trucks. No lights ahead. No sound except the rain and the slow creak of branches moving in the wind and the soft, wet crunch of tires on gravel and mud. Nolan drove the last quarter mile in the dark by feel, by the slight difference in texture that told him where the edge of the road ended and the soft shoulder began. He stopped at the tree line and cut the engine. The trucks behind him stopped one by one, silent and dark, like something deliberate in the night. 8 men got out and moved forward without being told. Assembling behind Nolan at the edge of the trees, he stood and looked across the clearing. The trailer was maybe 40 yards ahead, sitting on concrete blocks at the far edge of the open ground. Single wide, rusted siding, a front door that sat slightly off true in its frame. He could see the gap at the top corner, even from here. One window showed light, a dull amber glow behind a drawn curtain. The dart truck was parked in the mud alongside, hood facing away from them. Propane tank leaned against the far wall. Water ran off the edge of the roof in a thin, continuous line. Somewhere past the far tree line, a drainage ditch moved steadily in the dark. Nothing else moved. Nolan read the trailer carefully and without rushing. Front door, slightly off its hinges, which meant the lock was questionable. Window on the left side with no light behind it, probably a bedroom. A back utility door that was not fully closed, its edge catching a sliver of light from inside. He was still reading the geometry when he heard IT crying. IT came from the dark side of the trailer, muffled through thin walls, but he heard it. The sound a child makes when the fear has been going too long, and what is left is not the sharp, sudden terror of something happening, but the worn, hollow exhaustion of waiting hours for something to change. He had never heard Ava cry that way before. He had heard her cry from scraped knees and nightmares and the ordinary small injuries of childhood. This was different. This was what a 5-year-old sounds like when she has been sitting alone in a cold, dark room for hours without anyone coming. Everything in Nolan went quiet and very certain that he crossed the clearing at a dead run. His shoulder hit the front door above the lock, and it came off its top hinge and swung hard into the interior wall. The room inside was harshly lit by a single bare bulb. Kate was at the kitchen counter, bag of chips in one hand, television loud on a folding table in the corner. He had perhaps 1 second to process what was coming through his door before Dustin was already past Nolan's left shoulder, and the bat connected with his ribs with a sound like a bat meeting a fence post at full swing. Cade went sideways into the counter hard. The chips hit the floor. He screamed, half fury, half real pain, and swung back in a wide, panicked arc that connected with nothing but air. Trevor stepped in from the left and caught him by the shoulder. Wes came from the right. The kitchen was very small and very loud for the next several seconds. Nolan walked through all of it without stopping, down the narrow hallway. First door, bathroom, smelling of mildew. Second, a closet, rod broken, a cardboard box on the floor. Third door at the very end of the hall, and behind it, through the thin walls, that worn, steady crying that he pushed the door open. The room was cold, colder than the rest of the trailer, as if the heat had never reached this end of the building and nobody had thought to address it. A blanket on the bare floor, a lamp with no shade, throwing uneven yellow light up the peeling walls. Water stains spread across the ceiling in dark, irregular shapes. And in the far corner, wrapped in that blanket with her knees pulled to her chest and her face wet in her eyes, already finding the door the instant it opened, because she had been listening to everything happening since the front door came off its hinges, listening with every bit of attention a terrified 5-year-old has. Ava. She said one word. Daddy. Nolan crossed the room in 3 steps and dropped to his knees in front of her. She came forward out of the blanket and grabbed onto his jacket with both hands, her whole small body shaking in long, uneven waves. The shaking that happens after fear has been held too tightly for too long and finally gets permission to let go. She pressed her face against his chest. She said his name again and again. Just that one word, repeated until it settled from something frantic into something that was almost calm. I've got you, he said, low and even and completely certain. I'm here. I've got you. You're okay. He held her with both arms entirely around her and felt her heart beating hard against his chest. And he let her shake and let her cry and did not move. He said nothing else for a while. He just held on. He just stayed. From the front of the trailer, behind him, sounds he was aware of without attending to a mangoing down, the particular flat sound of someone meeting a floor at the end of serious beating, ash out, cutting off into something quieter. He processed it the way you process distant weather from inside a seal building. Present, acknowledged, and belonging to a different world, he had his daughter. When her shaking had slowed to something manageable, he stood with her in his arms, one hand against the back of her head, her face tucked into his neck, and carried her back down the narrow hallway and through the wrecked front door and out into the night air. Cold and wet, the smell off rain on mud and old leaves and pine from the trees at the edge of the clearing. From the direction of the highway, thin at first, and then not thin at all, the sound of sirens. 2 cruisers came in fast through the tree line and slowed as the clearing's mud pulled at their tires. The light bars cut the dark in cold repeating pulses of blue. 3 deputies stepped out with hands in their weapons, flashlights sweeping wide arcs across the clearing, the trailer, the truck. Raylan Boone stepped out of the second car. He walked across the mud toward Nolan at the same deliberate pace he used in the station, unhurried, taking everything in as he came. The broken door, the dark truck, the men standing in the clearing with their hands at their sides, and nothing readable on their faces. And Nolan at the tree lean, a child in his arms wrapped in a blanket. Boone stopped a few feet away. His eyes went to Ava first and stayed there for a moment, to kinge in her face against Nolan's shoulder, the blanket, the way she was holding on. He was doing a real assessment, not a formal one. Is she hurt? She's scared, Nolan said. Physically, she's all right. Boone held his gaze for a moment. Something moved across his expression that was not quite guilt but was in that direction. Then he turned toward the trailer. The deputies came out a minute later with Cade between them. He was being supported under both arms. His face was swollen on one side. His left leg was not working correctly at the knee, dragging at an angle that made the deputies adjust their grip and slow their pace. Hands cuffed behind his back, eyes moving without fully tracking. His mouth was shaping sounds that had not organized themselves into words. They lowered him to the mud. A deputy called for medical on the radio. Boone stood at the edge of the cleared area and looked at each of the men who had come out of the trailer. He looked at each of them for a measured moment. He looked at their hands. He looked at their faces. Then he looked at Nolan. Nolan looked back. Nothing was said. Boone pulled out his notepad and turned to a fresh page. Kidnapping, he said, mostly to himself. Extortion. Child endangerment. A deputy stepped to his shoulder and said something quietly. Boone listened without expression. 2 outstanding warrants from Kentucky as well. The paramedic unit came through the tree line. EMTs crossed the mud quickly, assessed Cade where he lay, stabilized his leg, got a line in. Just before they shifted him onto the stretcher, Cade turned his head and found Nolan across the clearing. The swelling made it difficult, but he managed it. He looked at Nolan with everything that remained, the anger, the pain, and underneath both of them the specific, impotent fury of a man who made a calculated play and lost every piece of it, who cannot locate a moment where he could have done anything differently, because the truth is there was no such moment. He had been building toward this outcome for a long time. Nolan stood in the rain with Ava in his arms and looked back at him without expression. No contempt, no satisfaction, no anger, nothing. He looked at Cade Rayner the way you look at a problem that has been resolved, with the neutral attention you give to something that is no longer yours to carry. The ambulance door closed. The lights started up, and the vehicle moved out through the trees. Boone came to Nolan one final time. I'll need a full statement. Tomorrow morning would work if... Tomorrow, Nolan said. She goes home tonight. Boone looked at the child in his arms. Then he nodded. First thing tomorrow. My desk. The investigation moved quickly because the evidence was extensive and the facts were not complicated. The clarity of it had a particular quality. The quality of things that were never actually mysterious, only hidden behind choices that had finally run out of room to hide. Cade Rayner had been in serious financial trouble for over a year. He had borrowed from people who did not structure their lending as a normal transaction. The debt came with the kind of interest that doubles in ways that have nothing to do with percentages, and with creditors who communicated their expectations through channels that were not subtle. He had managed the situation the way someone manages it when they are fundamentally convinced of their own ability to make problems disappear, through avoidance, through promises backed by nothing, through the steady expectation that the next opportunity would cover the last failure. The opportunities had stopped coming. The creditors had stopped being patient. Taking Ava was the plan that emerged when the arithmetic left him nowhere else to go. The phone records had the ransom call. Hank Dobbs placed him in the house on Maple Street. Forensic work at the trailer confirmed Ava's presence beyond any reasonable challenge. Two of Cade's creditors, facing their own legal exposure when the investigation turned their direction, provided detailed testimony about the debt and the nature of who was involved. Federal investigators built the kidnapping and extortion case in under 3 weeks. Every element fit against every other element with the straightforward coherence of a case that required no brilliance to prosecute, only organization. The text messages on Brielle's phone told the other story, and it was a slower story and a harder one to read. Investigators found exchanges going back 8 months in which the financial situation and the people involved were described in plain language. Messages from Cade's creditors, blunt, specific, making the nature of the debt and the consequences of non-payment unmistakably clear, had been forwarded into threads that included Brielle. She had read them. She had responded to some of them. She had said nothing to Nolan. She had said nothing to police. She had made no changes to the environment her daughter lived in. The delay in reporting was what cost her most in the prosecution. Investigators established the timeline with precision. Brielle had returned to the empty house on Maple Street and understood that Ava was gone approximately 2 hours and 11 minutes before any report was made to authorities. During that window, she had driven, parked in a gas station lot, and called Kate's number twice. The recordings of those calls and the surrounding context made clear she was not attempting to negotiate for Ava or establish her daughter's safety. She was attempting to understand how much trouble was coming for herself. The district attorney filed child neglect and obstruction charges. Brielle's attorney built a defense around her status as a secondary victim of Cade's manipulation. It was a reasonable argument that had not survived contact with a text message record. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, 3 months after the night at the trailer. Both Brielle and Cade were sentenced. Cade received 12 years on the federal kidnapping and extortion charges. 2 Kentucky warrants waited at the end of the Ohio sentence. A prison physician assessed his left knee 6 weeks after the arrest and submitted a report whose prognosis was precise and not encouraging. Further surgery was required. Full recovery was not expected. These were medical facts filed in a record at Cade would have considerable time to review. Brielle received 18 months on the state charges, with parole possible after 10. The judge, in her sentencing remarks, acknowledged the distinction between active harm and the reckless negligence that permits harm and reflected that distinction in the sentence length. She also noted that distinctions recognized by the law do not obligate the people most damaged by a harm to feel differently about the harm itself. Nolan sat in the back of that courtroom and listened and felt nothing he had not already felt. The custody hearing came 6 weeks later in a family courtroom that smelled like old carpet and radiator heat. Nolan sat on his side of the room in clean clothes with the folder his attorney had prepared. He had read every document in it twice on separate evenings. He did not look at Briley across the aisle, not because he was angry and not as a performance, but because he had nothing left to direct in her direction. Looking at her would require him to pretend there was something unresolved between them, and there was not. Judge Carroll had been on the family court bench for 19 years. She reviewed the police report, the text messages, the timeline, the prior custody agreement, and the guardian ad litem report. The guardian ad litem had met with Ava twice over the previous 4 weeks. Her report described a child who was otherwise healthy and developmentally on track, who showed clear and consistent distress when the mother's household was referenced, and who demonstrated what the report described as asecure and primary attachment to her father. Judge Carroll set the folder down and looked at the room. Full and permanent custody is awarded to the father, effective immediately. Brielle made a sound that was not a word. Her attorney said something quiet beside her. Nolan was already gathering his documents from the table. Nolan, her voice crossed the room, and he heard everything in it. The full weight of understanding arriving where understanding no longer had any useful work to do, the loss, the desperation. He heard all of it and he acknowledged it, and he kept walking, not as a performance, not to punish. Hesemply had nothing to give in that direction. Brielle had made her choices over a long stretch of time with full knowledge of what she was doing, and those choices had placed their daughter in a cold room at the end of a dark hallway, crying herself out alone in the dark. There was nothing she could say in a courthouse hallway that existed on the same scale as that. He was not going to stand still and pretend otherwise that he walked out. The day outside was cold and gray, the particular flat gray of Ohio, in late November when the sky cannot decide whether to snow. A thin layer had come down overnight and covered the courthouse steps and the sidewalks of Millfield in white that was already developing the gray cast of a small town's early winter. The trees along the street were entirely bare, their branches making clean, dark patterns against the low sky. Ava was waiting at the bottom of the steps. She was standing with Dustin, who had brought her over from her morning appointment with the guardian ad litem. She had her red winter coat on, the one with the white buttons she always did and undid during long waits, and her new white sneakers, and her stuffed rabbit tucked under her left arm in the particular way she carried it in places that required patience. She was looking at the courthouse door with the focused, patient attention of a child who knows exactly who is about to come through it. When it opened and she saw Nolan, she came up the steps at a run. He caught her at the top and lifted her in one motion, the way he had been doing since she was small enough to do it without thinking, and which he had been doing deliberately for the past several months, aware that the years of it were finite and choosing not to take a single one of them for granted. She wrapped her arms around his neck. She pressed her face against his shoulder. She smelled like the car heater and cedar from Dustin's old truck cab and the lavender shampoo Nolan kept stocked in the bathroom cabinet at home. "Are we going home now?" she asked. Her voice was soft and direct, the voice of a child confirming what she already believes to be true. He looked at her face, the same face that had been at the front window every Friday for 11 months without fail. The same face that had looked up at him from the corner of a cold trailer room, wet and shaking, and said one word with the total certainty of someone who had been waiting in the dark and had never once stopped believing he would come. "Yeah, baby," he said. "We're going home." He set her down and took her hand. They went down the courthouse steps together. Dustin fell in alongside them without ceremony and without needing to be invited. The three of them crossed the snow-covered parking lot. Ava's hand in Nolan's, the rabbit under her arm, the snow muffling their footsteps into something almost quiet. Nolan opened the back door of the truck and helped her up and buckled her in. Both straps fit-checked with 2 fingers the way he had always done it. Not because she asked, but because he had not stopped doing it and did not intend to. He got in the front, started the engine, let the heat come up slowly from the vents. They pulled out of the lot and onto the road. Millfield moved past the windows in its entirely ordinary way. The corner gas station, the hardware store with the hand-lettered signs in the window, the elementary school where Ava would start in the fall, the park where she had figured out the swings and announced it to him with the gravity of an actual achievement. Great and familiar and completely known. He did not turn on the radio. The only sound were the engine and the road, and from the back seat, the small sounds of Ava settling herself against the window, the rustle of her coat, the soft shift of the rabbit. He checked the mirror. She was asleep before they reached the edge of town. Her head rested against the glass. Her hands were loose in her lap. The rabbit settled against her side. Her face in sleep was completely at rest. No tension in it, no wariness, just the total ease of a child who is exactly where she is supposed to be. For the first time in months, Ava slept without waking. Nolan turned onto the highway and let the miles come. The road was straight and open under a pale gray sky. The truck moved steadily through the cold afternoon. The world outside was quiet and flat and entirely ordinary in all directions. He did not think about the courthouse or the trailer or the 3 months of legal proceedings or any off the weight that had brought them to this particular Friday afternoon. He let all of it settle into the past, into the fixed and permanent category of things that were finished. He was done carrying it. What he held onto on that drive was simple. The road ahead, the sound of the engine, the weight of the truck on the cold highway. And from the back seat, steady and quiet as the thing he had crossed dark fields in the middle of a November night to find and would never take for granted again. The sound of his daughter breathing. He kept driving.